Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here today because we're going to completely shatter a very familiar experience. Imagine it starts pouring rain outside, not just a light drizzle, but a heavy, relentless, multi-day downpour. Now, today, that's just a minor inconvenience, right? But for the vast majority of human history, rain was a high-stakes crisis. So let's dive right into this and look at what our ancient ancestors actually did when the skies opened up and why those rain-soaked days are very likely the exact reason our species thrived.
I want you to really think about this for a second. What actually happened when the rain just wouldn't stop? Picture this. You've tracked a herd of animals yesterday. You have the route mapped out perfectly in your head. You're starving. You haven't eaten in 2 days. And then, the rain hits. Suddenly, the mud washes away all those tracks. Moving barefoot over wet, rocky terrain means you risk twisting an ankle, which out there is practically a death sentence. The river is rising fast. You aren't bored. You are trapped. The gap between our modern world and theirs is just massive. On one hand, we have our reality. You close the window, grab a cozy blanket, make some coffee, and open Netflix. The sound of rain is literally just calming background noise. But rewind 50,000 years? That exact same sound meant you could die in 3 different ways before the storm even passed. It meant a desperate fight against hypothermia, dodging flash floods that could completely wipe out your cave, and terrifyingly, staring down apex predators.
Consider this staggering number for a moment. 25. That is how much faster a wet human loses body heat compared to a dry one. 25 times faster. Without waterproof clothing or modern insulated shelter, a long rainstorm in anything below 50 degrees Fahrenheit would drop your core temperature straight into the hypothermia range within hours. And remember, most of the ancient world got that cold at night, even at higher elevations in Africa during the wet season.
But, the cold wasn't even the only threat. The rain drove absolutely everything into shelter. It created what archaeologists actually call the compressed world. Flash floods forced humans, their prey, and some seriously terrifying predators to squeeze into the exact same shrinking, dry spaces. In South African cave sites, archaeologists have actually found human remains and large cat remains in the identical soil layers. And some of those human skulls, they have puncture marks that perfectly match leopard teeth. You weren't just trapped by the weather. You were trapped in the dark with monsters.
Right in the middle of all that chaos, there was one job that mattered more than anything else: keeping the fire alive. Now, we see controlled fire use going way back, like 400,000 years ago at Kesem Cave, and maybe even 1,000,000 years ago at Wonderwork Cave. But reliable evidence of humans actually creating fire from scratch, that doesn't confidently appear until about 40,000 years ago. So the absolutely crucial point here is this. For most of human history, if your fire went out during a storm, you couldn't just magically relight it. You were plunged into cold, dark, deadly terror.
Because starting a new fire was nearly impossible. Preserving the one you had was a literal life-or-death mandate. Our ancestors went to unbelievable lengths for this. Some groups would wrap smoldering coals in thick green leaves just to transport them. Others used what we'd call biological lighters, like tinder fungus, which could catch a tiny spark and safely smolder inside itself for hours. We know this for a fact because when they found the 5,300-year-old frozen body of Ötzi the Iceman in the Alps, he was actually carrying a dedicated fire kit right on his belt: flint, pyrite, and fungus. Even just 5,000 years ago, you absolutely did not leave home without fire insurance.
So when the rain finally hit, someone's entire job for hours on end became this frantic but highly calculated 4-step survival process. Step 1. Shield the flames with hides or thick brush. Step 2. Run out and forage the dead lower branches of coniferous trees because the canopy above usually kept them dry. Step 3. Manually split open soaking wet logs just to extract the dry inner wood. And Step 4. Use birch bark as kindling because it contains a chemical called butylene, which miraculously burns even when it's completely wet. If that fire died, the whole group might die.
But let's look at the flip side of this crisis. Once the fire was finally safe and the group was dry, they couldn't just leave. Which brings us to Section 1, the original makerspaces, where survival mandates invention. Being stuck indoors actually sparked a chronological explosion of ancient technology. Down at Blombus Cave, 100,000 years ago, we see complex ochre processing workshops. Fast forward to 77,000 years ago at Sabutu Cave, and they aren't just surviving, they're building actual bedding, layered with Cape laurel leaves, which acts as a natural insect repellent. That is true prehistoric pest control. Then, 61,000 years ago, delicate bone needles with tiny drilled eyes start to appear. Those require intense, stationary focus. You don't carve a tiny bone needle while running from a leopard. You make it when you have hours to kill sitting by the fire.
And then there's string. The oldest direct evidence of twisted plant fiber string dates back 52,000 years. Making rope is a slow, incredibly repetitive, patience-testing task. It is the absolute perfect bad weather activity. Archaeologists even found a 35,000-year-old tool in Germany carved out of mammoth ivory, specifically designed with 4 holes and spiral grooves just for twisting plant fibers into rope. Think about how string completely revolutionized human survival. It held shelters together, it created traps, it bound tools to handles, and it was almost certainly invented by someone just waiting for the rain to stop.
But practical tools were just the beginning. Once the chores were done, our ancestors turned to something far more profound. Welcome to Section 2, The Birth of Culture, Deep in the Dark.
The sheer scale of prehistoric creativity is just astounding. We're talking about the magnificent paintings in Chauvet Cave in France, 36,000 years old, and the 45,000-year-old figurative art over in Sulawesi, Indonesia. These artists drew lions, rhinos, and bears mid-stride with all their tense muscles entirely from memory. And get this, they didn't paint them at the sunny cave entrance. They crawled hundreds of meters deep into total darkness, using animal fat lamps just to see. Nobody does that on a beautiful, perfect hunting day. You do that when you've been trapped inside for days, you've already sharpened every single tool you own, and the only thing left to do is venture into the dark and create.
And it wasn't just visual art either, it was the spoken word. There's this incredible study by anthropologist Polly Weissner of the Juhansi Bushmen in the Kalahari. She found that during the day, conversations were strictly practical, complaints, land rights, who gets what resources. But at night, when they were trapped around the fire, over 80% of the conversation shifted to stories, songs, and ceremonies. The firelight literally changed their brain chemistry and the social dynamic. It softened faces, it reduced tension, and it really opened people up.
The campfire essentially became the original social network. I mean, when 15 to 30 people are forced into a confined space for days on end, they're going to talk. But they weren't just gossiping. They were downloading survival data into each other's brains. Where do the water sources dry up? Which plants are safe to eat? How exactly do you track a specific animal? This was critical, life-saving knowledge being directly transferred from person to person.
It all really boils down to this. Rainy days weren't dead time, they were transmission time. It was the exact moment when the collective memory of the entire group was updated and reinforced. To prove how unbelievably powerful this was, just look at Australian Aboriginal cultures. They have oral stories describing specific geological sea level changes that happened 7,000 years ago. Those stories survived for 7 millennia solely because groups spent enormous amounts of time sitting together, retelling those exact narratives over and over while waiting out the weather.
But eventually, the rain always stopped. And when our ancestors finally stepped out of the cave, they found a massive environmental reset. This brings us to Section 3, the aftermath advantage, stepping out of the cave.
The world outside was suddenly this massive treasure trove. First, tracking. The rain softened the ground, leaving perfectly clear, detailed animal prints. You knew exactly what walked by and how fast it was moving. Second, water. Prehistoric campsites almost always feature carved rock depressions that would fill up with clean drinking water during a storm. And third, the food supply just exploded. Tubers were way easier to dig from the wet soil, mushrooms sprouted everywhere, and massive swarms of high-protein termites emerged. You didn't even need weapons. You could literally just pick the termites up and gorge on them like prehistoric popcorn. The groups who spent their downtime preparing were the ones completely ready to exploit this tactical wealth.
And this brings us to a really profound realization. Boredom simply didn't exist for them. When you're sitting in a cave with the rain hammering outside and your survival completely depends on what you can make with your hands in those few hours, you do not get bored. You get creative. Every sewn hide, every twisted rope, every story, and every breathtaking cave painting came directly from this incredibly vital downtime. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If our entire culture, our technology, our art, and our social networks were born from the absolute desperation of being trapped together in a storm, what exactly are we losing today by using our rainy days just to sink into the couch and binge Netflix? Next time you hear the rain tapping on your window, remember the makerspaces of our ancestors. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this completely changes how you look at a rainy day.